Response Times by Centra. I am your host, Kyle Smith. I'm the Regional Vice President for Consulting Services for Centra in the United States. And today's session will last 1 hour. To help get through all of the material we have for you today, we will be muting everyone's microphone for this session. However, we have provided a window for you to ask questions. As appropriate, we will be responding to those questions, and hopefully by the end of this session, we will have answered everything that you're hoping to get out of this session. Today's guest with me is Cary Millsap. Cary is an Oracle Performance Specialist since 1989. He's our Vice President of User Experience Solutions here at Centra, and he's also the owner of MethodR, the corporation that we are really going to be talking about today. In addition to this, Cary is a well-known author and authored the book Optimizing Oracle Performance with Jeff Holt, another Centra employee. And he's also the author of the MethodR Guide to Mastering Oracle Trace Data, which is directly related to the content that we're going to be discussing today. Now, with that, Cary, I think people would much rather hear you talk than necessarily me. So just to kind of tee it off, one of the things that I found interesting when we started having our initial dialogues about what MethodR is, and he's really started to educate me on what the value proposition is, you really kind of coaxed the conversation in a unique way, and that was by talking about experiences as opposed to talking about performance specifically. So can you kind of tell me what you mean by the word experience? Why do you use that, and what are you trying to get across?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason I use the word is because performance can be viewed two ways. There's kind of the under the table looking up way, sort of the back office way of database administrators thinking about performance in terms of their utilization statistics, their hit ratios, their miss rates, those kinds of things. But the success that I've felt in the market has been more oriented towards considering performance as an attribute of an experience that a user has with the system. Not the experiences that the DBAs have with the system, but the experiences that the users have with the system. And so we kind of created this, it's almost like a database design, you know, thinking about experience as an entity. If you think in terms of what causes, you know, what's the basis for a user's experience with a computer, and it's a program. Somewhere in the computer is a program that this user is running. And this program may be stable for 3 months until it gets upgraded, and then it's a different program. It may have the same name, but it's a different version of the same program. And so the program kind of has this version number attribute. And then when somebody runs the program, there are attributes of what we are calling the experience, which is basically just an execution of the program. And some of the attributes of that experience are who did it, what program was it, what version of that program was it, when did the experience begin, you know, when did the user click, and then when did the result come back. And so the duration between when the user clicks and when the result comes back is what people call response time, but it's really just a duration of the experience that somebody had with the system. And one of the reasons that I was trying to push into your mind the notion of experience is that once you start working on that duration and you do things like fix people's bad SQL statements or add an index that's missing and stuff, you also start to see applications that are just designed poorly from a user interface perspective. And so for some programs, even when they're fast, the experience isn't great. And because we're a software company, in addition to being a company capable of going out and helping people's Oracle systems run faster, we use the term experience because we understand that sometimes to make the experience better requires a redesign of the interface that the user has with the system, right? So that's kind of the thing. So the ERD is, for a given program, somebody may run that program 50,000 times a day, and that results in 50,000 distinct experiences with that program.
Well, and so with that, right, so the thing that I found so amazing about that is a lot of times when we're talking with our customers, we're asked to kind of look at this thing, right? And the fact that when we come at it from your approach, which is saying, no, let's look at the full end-to-end experience of the user, I found it's actually been very powerful to help prioritize what we're doing to help solve either an issue or come up with a new creative solution.
Right. Right.
So is that, the whole idea of this experience concept, is that really why you guys started looking at creating Method R in the first place, or what was the impetus behind creating Method R?
Yeah, there's kind of a genesis story that extends even prior to the thing I'm going to tell you now. But the real tipping point, the week that we knew that we needed a different method from the looking at ratios type of thing, happened in 1998, and I was actually, I think I might have been a vice president, but I was at least a senior director at the time. And I was home Saturday morning. I don't know what I was going to do, but the phone rang, the house phone rang, and it was Ray Lane, who was the COO of Oracle at the time. And he told me that there was a customer in Southern California that was having such problems that they were threatening that they might go out of business by Friday of the following week. And they had declared that if they go out of business, then Oracle's going out of business with them. So the COO of Oracle's on the phone with me telling me that I need to put a team in place and that I need to get on a plane today to go to Southern California. And so I'm actually going to show some visuals on this. I've told the story often enough that I made this movie poster out of it called The Whiteboard of Grievances. And the word grievance is specifically well chosen. These people didn't have performance problems. They didn't have issues. They had grievances. And you might have picked up on the fact that grievances is a technical term in law. It's a legal term. They were lawyered up, and they were bound and determined that if we didn't fix, we, Oracle Corporation, didn't fix these grievances that they had, remedy the grievances, that they were going to sue and make life really miserable for a bunch of people at Oracle. And so they actually came to us with the list. And the list of grievances started with number 1, print shipping labels doesn't work. And number 2, order confirmation ID doesn't work. And they had 21, I think, of these things. And so they actually had prepared a whiteboard, and it looked kind of like this. This is made up. The first 2 are exactly what their first 2 problems were. And they're sort of, like most customers, their assumption was that there's some magical thing inside the system that if we flip it from off to on or change it from 42 to 43, it was going to fix all these problems. And again, they had 20-something. I just list 10 here. And we needed to fix all these. Now, I brought a team of about, 6 people or so. And fortunately, they had prioritized this list. So the number 1 thing really was their number 1 thing. And so what I did was I took one person from my team to go look at the number 1 thing, which is the print shipping labels problem. And then I had the rest of my team go look at the order confirmation ID problem. And we split in that way, right? So this is the interface for the engagement that the client brought to us. Now, I want to tell the story of the first 2 because it's fascinating. And without understanding the problems and how we fix them, you kind of don't get the full flavor of what Method R exists. So with number 1, print shipping labels, there was an Oracle e-business. They didn't call it that back then. It was Oracle Financial Applications application back then. And they actually had an issue where they had people down at the dock where they're supposed to be shipping their product. The loaders from UPS and FedEx and DHL weren't putting boxes on trucks. The trucks were sitting there. The boxes were sitting there, but the folks weren't putting boxes on trucks. They were just sitting around, with their legs swinging off the dock drinking coffee. And we were told this. So being technology people, kind of our first instinct was, well, let's go look at the concurrent manager and let's see if the concurrent manager is running slowly. That's a feature within the Oracle e-business suite that schedules batch jobs. But for some reason, and I don't really understand why it occurred to me, but it just hit me. Instead of starting up here with the DBAs, let's go down to the docks and look at what they're seeing and see the experience from the customer's perspective. And we walk down, and sure enough, there's UPS guys and FedEx guys, there's like 20 of them, walking around drinking coffee. They got nothing to do. And there are stacks of thousands and thousands and thousands of boxes sitting on the concrete on wooden pallets. And the trucks are there with the doors open, and nobody's putting boxes in trucks. And the reason they weren't putting boxes in trucks is because there weren't any labels to put on the boxes. So they didn't know whether this box was a DHL or a FedEx or UPS box. They didn't know where it was going. It didn't have a label yet. And it had this little bitty printer. It was about this big, about the size of a volleyball, sitting on a pedestal in the middle of this warehouse floor, and it wasn't moving. You know, it's this little matrix dot printer that prints stickers that are this big, and it wasn't doing anything. And so I asked the guy that had taken me down there. There was a cable that ran from the printer down the pedestal, across the floor, over to a door that was closed. And I said, what's on the other end of this cable? He said, well, there's a little PC in there that's connected to this microvax, which is then connected to the big box that the Oracle databases run on. I said, well, can you take me in the door and show me what's in there? He's like, kind of, okay, sure. So he opens the door and we go in there, and there's this PC sitting there, and the screen is black. This is before the day of screensavers. And I said, you know, can you show me, you know, what this PC is doing again? He says, well, this PC, all it is really just an FTP client for that microvax over there. And I said, well, you know, can you just show me something on the screen? And he hits like the shift key, and it stayed black. And the guy got red, and he did this, and he went, oh my God, somebody rebooted the FTP server and didn't turn it back on. So he turned the FTP server back on, and literally out there we hear the printer's going, and problem solved. Problem one, solved. And we were never going to find it upstairs. We just weren't. I mean, we might have, like, you know, metaphorically, like, felt the cable through the concurrent manager, and then thought, oh, where does this go? And then gone to the microvax, and oh, where does that go? And then we would have gotten to it eventually, I guess. But this took 5 minutes, just looking at it and tracing it back from the user experience back to where it was broken. Took all of 5 minutes, and it was just a silly little, okay, that's not an Oracle problem, actually. Mm-hmm. So when we fixed that problem, that's the only symptom that it fixed. Now, we went upstairs and asked the other team, well, how did your work go? And they had this kind of silly smirk on their face. The problem with order confirmation ID is that companies like Walmart would call into this company and order like 1 million line items of their product. And it would take an average of 30 minutes to give them an order confirmation ID back. So you've got this procurement guy going, I want to buy, you know, $10 million worth of stuff, and they're having to wait on the phone for 30 minutes to get a confirmation ID before they could get off the phone and go on with their business. And these distributors were telling this company that, look, if that's not going to get any faster, we can't do business with you anymore. So it was a serious threat to their existence, to their survival. And so I had another part of my team go look at the problem, and what they found was that somebody had written a report on the order lines table, and the first command in this report that they had written, the people that wrote the report had apparently been trained in either Sybase or Microsoft SQL Server. But the first command in this report was to lock the OE lines table, lock the whole blasted table. And the report ran an average of an hour. So sometimes you would go and be able to give an order confirmation ID right away. Sometimes it would take almost an hour, and the average is about 30 minutes. So problem 2 was take that locked table out of that report, and that actually solved their number 9 problem as well. So occasionally we'll solve one problem, and then it'll have kind of a collateral benefit effect. Yeah, on something else. And really, we just walked down the list. We did one thing, it fixed one thing. We did one thing, it fixed 3 things. And eventually, after we got to the bottom of the list, you know, it's celebration time, and nobody's going to get sued anymore. And what we discovered was, or what we sort of reaffirmed, was this way of looking at systems that needs to start with the step that they did before we got there, which is the prioritization step. But then the problems need to be expressed in terms of the business, because the system works for the business, right? Not the other way around. So the business gets to define what the #1 priority thing is. And if we'd have just walked in and started to look for bad-looking statistics, we'd have never found the FTP server problem. We'd have never found the lock table problem. So once the priority is in place, look at the thing. I mean, look right at it. Go where the people are that are seeing it and look at it the way they're looking at it, and then measure. Right? And then it's just a matter of figuring out what are the different things we can do and which one's the one that's going to work best. And then you repeat until the business doesn't need you to fix things anymore. There comes a point where the next fix that you implement costs more to implement than the value it's going to return. So there's a place where the business gets to say, you know what, right there is fine. Now we're efficient again, running our business, and you don't need to go, do any obsessive, compulsive, additional stuff in the system now.
Yeah.
That's really where it came from.
And I think the reason I love that story and I love kind of Method R is that it does seem to apply more than just to pure technology problems. It's really a method associated with how you would solve any inefficiencies, right, within a business. And,
right.
And I really like the fact that you can look at it as a higher level, and it just makes sense, right? It's just a very methodical, axiomatic is the word I've heard you use, approach to looking at how you can improve a process or improve an experience, as you say.
Right.
When I think about a real specific project that you and I have had the opportunity to work on together, 7-Eleven comes to mind, and I think we can talk about 7-Eleven here because you have had the opportunity to publicly present with one of our key sponsors, Richard Russell, about some of the things that we were able to improve on a critical business process for them.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about what Method R did, kind of maybe set the scene a little bit about what we were kind of coming into, how you used your approach, and then also how we used the specific tooling that's really kind of the manifestation of the Method R approach.
Right. And Method R has been around for, the folks doing Method R have been around for 20 years in the Dallas area, in Grapevine, basically doing this work. And Sandy Marshall, the sales rep at Centrum, introduced us one day to 7-Eleven, who's 8 miles away from us, and they have been for years. And we met on the phone. We met Richard Russell and Pete McGee, who had a business problem, and they had had this business problem for several months. I think it had been at least 6 months that they've had this problem. 7-Eleven makes a lot of different kinds of food. When you go into their store, a lot of things that you find in their refrigerator area are freshly made that exact same day. You buy a sandwich, you buy a brownie, it's all made, reasonably close to where the store is. And as a corporation, 7-Eleven has literally like a kitchen laboratory where professional chefs invent the next cookie. They invent the next sandwich, the next brownie, and they track all their ingredients for these food items in an Oracle database using an application that Oracle bought a few years ago called Agile PLM for process. And so I've just got this mental image that a train car load of wheat flour, shows up at a 7-Eleven kitchen, and all the ounces of flour are measured in an Oracle data or monitored in an Oracle database. And then when you put 2 teaspoons of that flour into a brownie, if that flour has gluten in it, if that flour has carbohydrates or protein in it, those amounts are tracked and arithmetically composed into one of these little stickers that appears, the little thing that looks like that, right? This is not a 7-Eleven thing, but that little sticker that shows how much protein, how many carbs, and everything, that comes out of an Oracle database. And the problem that they were having is that in the test kitchen, a chef would go to a laptop and search for an ingredient. Like, I'm making a kind of sandwich, what kinds of cheese do we have available to us? And he would type in, search for an ingredient, and he'd type in cheese, and he'd hit return, and it would take 2.5 minutes for the answer to come back. And when you're an inventor, when you're creating something, there's a certain flow that you need to be in. And if your application takes you out of that flow for 2 minutes, it becomes a business problem. And so they described this to us on the phone, and they also described to us that they had a number of consulting organizations come in, professional services organizations that had left them these long lists of things that they needed to try. And Richard explained that they tried really all of them that they could. Some of the things on the list are pretty expensive things to just try and see. Like let's rebake your whole I/O subsystem, for example. Maybe that'll work, right? That's what this list looked like. And they'd kind of gotten to the end of their patience with the list, and they were, when Sandy called them, she gave them a different message that, we can come in and look at your experience and tell you where that experience's time is going. And so it ended up being an engagement. I believe we went on it on Tuesday. We went through 3 or 4 iterations of the steps that I'm showing you here, and I'll even simplify those steps further and show you these. We really just ask 4 questions over and over, right? How long is the thing that you care about? So in this number 1, there's kind of the prioritization is built into the step, right? How long is this thing you care about? And then really where we come in is why. Why is that thing taking that long? And we don't look at AWR for the half hour it ran in. We look at specifically it. If this thing takes 2 minutes to run, then we look at its 2 minutes of code path and how that experience had its time consumed. And then we start asking questions. Well, what if we were to change this? What if we were to change that? And the way that we look at things, we're actually able to predict, well, if we do this, it won't make any difference, and we can prove it. But if we do that, it'll make a 45% difference. So we should do that. And basically, the what else is the iterator in this list, right? We can, and in fact, at 7-Eleven, we took their 2-minute thing down to 1 minute in about a half a day. And then when we re-asked, why does this thing take a minute? Well, we found other inefficiencies, and we took it down to 15 seconds. And then I think it took us about 4 iterations. And by the end of the engagement, we were able to make a thing that was taking 2 to 3 minutes, was completing in about half a second.
And so what did that mean for the business, that this thing that was taking 2 minutes? Did it mean they didn't get a coffee break? Did it mean that something was moving faster, no more excuses for burning things, which would be my excuse?
Now, Richard and I presented on stage at the Dallas Oracle user group, and he was very kind in describing the business benefit, which I'm trying to think of specifically a literal thing that he said. But one of the things that I think he sort of focused on was it just gave people more confidence in the system. It made people able to focus on their work instead of focusing on why is this dadgum thing in my way of getting my work done. And that's a pretty common feeling that people exhibit. And in fact, in this particular case, kind of a collateral benefit was that there were other things other than search for cheese in the test kitchen that were being plagued by the same thing. So actually finding the root cause that we found cleared up a lot of other experience deficits as well. So they had more than just the one user that we were looking at benefit from the solution that we actually implemented to fix the thing in the test kitchen.
Well, and one of the reasons I enjoyed this project, right, is because a lot of times when we go in and we tune something, we think about it from kind of a core DBA or platform perspective. We look at the thing that just seems at the top of the list to be taking the longest, right? And we'll go work on that and we'll go fix it. And a lot of times we can be pretty proud because even just using kind of our normal toolkit, right, we can get a little faster. And then we go to the end users and they didn't actually notice that we fixed anything. Right, because it wasn't the thing that they were worried about, right? It wasn't the thing that gave them less confidence in the system that they were running. So I liked the fact that there was a real human at the end of this, right? And their experience was improved. And so that's one of the reasons I just thought this was such a good engagement. But kind of going into that a little bit, why do you think everyone just doesn't do it this way, right? Why do you think we've kind of struggled as a community, right, to really think about the end experience and go through this iterative process?
Yeah, it's a quite simple answer. It's just hard. There are a couple things that are hard about it. Number one is that people are conditioned, oh, I wish I'd remember the name of this phenomenon. People are conditioned to think that they can't measure things the way that we did at 7-Eleven. They're the tools that they use, the OEMs and the Toads and even SQL Developer and those kinds of tools, they don't really encourage you to believe that you can literally measure the steps in the code path for my program that caused my program to take 2 minutes. The facility's been there since 1991 to be able to trace a program in Oracle and see exactly where all the steps have been taking time. But people don't go to educational experiences really outside methodology to learn how to do that. So first off, they kind of don't know that that capability exists and they don't understand the power of what's there. But then the second thing is that even if you do bother to go get the trace data, and a lot of people do, a lot of people know what TK-Prof is, and there's some other sort of tools in that same genre out in the marketplace. But if you go get a trace file for a 2-minute experience, and this trace file is maybe 8 megs, well, what are you going to do with that data? The problem is that TK-Prof really only probably harvests about 20% of that, right? Back in the late 90s, when Jeff Holt and I were working on these projects where we were looking at trace data, what we found ourselves doing repeatedly is looking at TK-Prof, getting maybe a whiff of what the problem was, but then having to use our own creativity and going back into the trace file for pulling more data that TK-Prof didn't really pay any attention to, and extracting stuff out of the data that nobody at Oracle had really built a tool to extract. And so back in the early 2000s, after we left Oracle and we're now actually part of a software development company, we started to make tools that would do that work for people, because it's blasted really, really hard to go to raw trace data and extract the value out of it that we can extract today because of the investment that we've made in the tools that we've created. So I think the bottom line answer is that tracing is a little bit hard, but mostly not because it's intrinsically hard, but mostly because people aren't trained how to do it. It's just not part of the regular curriculum. And then once you get that data, what do you do with it, right? You have to have a tool in order to be able to make sense out of it, and a lot of people don't.
So talk a little bit about then how you would go about actually getting this data. What does it mean? How do you know you got it, right? So we're starting from that process. How would you encourage people to really get going?
Well, and 7-Eleven is really an idealized model of this. We went into a room where we had the business leadership that was concerned about this problem. We had Richard in the room with us. We had Pete in the room with us. And then we asked for, is there somebody who can run this search for cheese process over and over so that we can catch it in the act of being slow? And Pete said, oh yeah, I can run that for you. Like, I got a laptop right here, I'll run it anytime you want. And he said, well, do we have a DBA that can actually execute dbms monitor.session_trace_enable? And I said, yeah. Let us call one of those in. And we had a guy in the room within 10 minutes. And so we've got the right team assembled right away. And we were able to kind of look over the shoulder of the guy who was running the actual app and help instruct the DBA on, all right, let's turn trace on right. Okay, now. And then he runs the search for cheese, and as soon as the search for cheese comes back with the right answer, okay, let's turn tracing off now. And that can be a non-trivial process. If you've got connection pooling, for example, then there may be little bits of trace data scattered across various files. But I've blogged about some of the challenges and some of the solutions, and in the book that you mentioned about mastering Oracle trace data, we show worked examples of how to use tools that we provide to basically work out getting the trace data that exactly corresponds to that user experience. And that's the thing. If you're looking at trace data that explains that 110 seconds of time, and the user actually felt that 110 seconds of time, then you're looking at the right data, right? And there's no way that the performance problem can hide from you if you're looking at that data, right? You get to see, oh, there was 50% of its time spent doing this thing, and now we know exactly where the leverage is for us to point our analytical attention. right? So basically, it's our job to set expectations that, look, getting this first trace file may take a while, and it usually takes less than 4 hours to get the first trace file. But once we do that, it becomes a repeatable process where the DBA and the application user can trace stuff even after we go home, right? They're able now to collect data properly that shows exactly where this experience has spent its time.
Okay, and I've kind of been through this with you a few times, right? So seems like there's an education process just to kind of understand how you collect that trace file, or how you define an experience so that you're not just collecting everything under the sun. But I know one of the things about trace data, if others have looked at it as I have, it's really hard to look at the trace data and really interpret it into something that's really meaningful unless you already know what you're looking for. And so you kind of have to make some assumptions typically when you're looking at the trace data based on what you've seen. I guess my thought though is the tool that you've built. Can you talk about how maybe the tool would actually help that process?
Yeah, and let me do a little bit of moving real estate around on my screen here. What I've done is I've set up an empty browser page because the tool, the Method Art Profiler, creates an HTML document that maps to your trace data, that explains the information about your trace data that you need to see. The profiler I've actually started up. So this window down here on the bottom right is the Method Art Profiler itself. I'm going to move it up so that if you're looking at the videos, they don't occlude your view of it. And in this Finder window here, I actually have the trace file, one of the early trace files from 7-Eleven when the process is taking a couple of minutes to run. And so this .trc file is literally just an Oracle trace file that we helped them collect that first morning that we were there. And to run our tool, we basically just drag the trace file into it. And you can see there's a progress bar. Usually the progress bar is not interesting for super long because it reasonably quickly produces an HTML output. I'm going to go ahead and drag my my window to be a little bit bigger. And I think looking at my iPad here, you folks in the audience can probably read this. I'm going to probably knock it up one more spot. But here you can see the first big red thing that kind of attracts your attention is that this report explains where a 110.199907 second experience has consumed its time. And it's about 2 minutes. It was 1 minute and 50 seconds, this particular execution of search for cheese from this database product. And as we scroll down, we can see a lot of words that really explain what the report is about and what kinds of questions the report answers and where you can go for more information. And then when we get to the meat of the data in the report, what you can see is a list of 4 what we call profiles. And we use the word profile in the kind of the venerated computer science sense. I know that profile now corresponds to something having to do with execution plans in Oracle, but when you said profiles in 1973 or 1983 or 1993, computer scientists would know what you meant, and they would think, oh, you mean basically an explanation for a response time, right? You write a program and you profile it and you see where its time has gone. And that's really all we've done here is we've profiled Oracle spending time, and we can see it took 110.199907 seconds. And from the perspective of subroutine calls that Oracle makes, and this is where my most recent blog post at carymillsap.blogspot.com comes in. Oracle instruments itself very, very well. And we can see in the trace data that 88% of this 110 seconds was consumed using CPU for fetch database calls. We can see that 7.5% of the time was consumed using CPU for parse database calls. We can see that 1.7% of our time was consumed executing the system calls that Oracle calls SQLnet message from client, and so on, right? There are 12 others. This unaccounted for thing doesn't take much time, so we really don't need to learn what that means today. But if unaccounted for within DB calls had taken 90% of our time, then today's the day we learn what that means. And that's what the book is good for, because there are really only, I want to say, probably 10 patterns of this kind of a table that account for probably 95% of the performance problems you'll ever see. Most performance problems fit into one of 10 or so categories. But as I scroll through the profiler output, and this is really more of a tour through the product than it is a diagnosis of the problem, but we'll get to that in a moment. The next section explains the 110 seconds, the same 110.199907, accurate to the microsecond, in a little bit of a different way. It explains by Oracle database call. So we can see, no big surprise, because we knew that CPU for fetching was the main contributor of time from the prior section, but here we can see a little bit more information about the database call itself. We can see that there were 5,673 fetch calls, and they returned 5,149 rows. And we can already start to sort of form an hypothesis in our mind about what's going on here. We've got an application that's not returning multiple rows per fetch call. It's returning on some fetch calls 0 rows, because there aren't enough rows. There's not even 1 row per fetch being returned. So that's the little item that we can store in our head, and we can say, well, parsing is taking 9 seconds, which is a heck of a lot of time, really, but it's nowhere near our biggest problem. So let's defer on that. We'll look at that later. If it's still a problem after we fix the fetching problem, then we'll take a look. But right now, it may be a huge problem, and yeah, we've got a ton of library cache misses. And somebody in the room may go, oh, I know how to fix that problem. But you look at the 8.1% number and say, well, I appreciate that you know how to fix that problem, but even if you fix that problem, nobody's really going to notice a big difference, right? Because 2 minutes minus 9 seconds is still 2 minutes. Nobody's going to hold a parade for you if you get rid of that 9 seconds. Now, as I scroll down, here's yet another perspective on the same exact 10.199907 seconds. And this starts to bring to mind that this is kind of an ETL tool, right? It's like like an OLAP tool. It's an analytical tool where we're looking at the same data through different dimensional faces of a hypercube. And I've seen it through the lens of subroutine calls. I've seen it through the lens of Oracle database calls. And now we're looking at it through the lens of Oracle cursors. And if you just let the tool kind of drag your attention to the red and bold things, you can see that there are 2 statements here. Select executions into fetch count, blah, blah, blah. This one took 48 seconds, which is 43.9% of our time. So that's a big deal. And then we see another statement, which now that I look at it, you realize it's exactly the same statement as the other one, but in this context, as a child of a different statement than this was a child of. This statement consumes another 48 seconds. So we really got lucky here, because we're looking at one single statement that if we can fix this one statement, it's actually going to help 2 different places in the code. And now if I scroll down a little bit more, you'll see the 4th perspective, which is the profile by statement. And here we can see the same 110.199907 seconds, but what we've done now is we've aggregated all of those cursors so that the statement only appears once, and we can see how important it is. The 2 44%ers make this statement contribute 88.6% to our response time. So we've really kind of stepped on the problem here. And this statement is the reason that this thing takes, it's 97 out of the 110 seconds. If we could get rid of the statement, for example, we could make this thing run in about 13 seconds instead of 110. So the tool makes it easy to see the answers to the next questions, like why does a statement take so long? So we'll click on the link, and it knocks us down to section 4.1. Section 4 is the report on statements individually, and point 1 means the top 1 statement that was in that table up above.
So can I pause you and ask a quick question?
Yeah. So please. I thought I heard you inhale.
Yeah. So, right, as we look at this, right, it's really obvious that this one SQL statement is taking up the majority of the time, right, and that it's spending the most time on the CPU. Do you have a hypothesis for why maybe this would be difficult to see outside of this tool, where it's literally in red? Yeah.
Well, let me back up to the very top of the report, back to where I showed you this list. Here it's easy to see that the statements, let me back up. I'm going to give you a rule of thumb that you can live on forever. Here it is. Here it is, folks. The problem is always the denominator. the reason that people don't see the right things is that the denominator is wrong in most cases. And in this case, our denominator for this fraction, 88.6%, is the experience that you felt. Some chef in a test kitchen felt 110 seconds. And of that 110 seconds, 88.6% was this one statement. If you look at the system with AWR, you're going to see a list of the top 10 or top 20 SQL statements during the half-hour period.
Yeah.
In that AWR report, this statement that's highlighted here, I don't know, I think we looked at it, it wasn't even in the top 20, but it might have been number 16 or 17 or something. And who in their right mind is going to look at an AWR report and go, you know what the problem is? It's number 16 on this list of 20 things, right? All we're doing is we're insisting on the right denominator, and then we're accurately adding things up, which is hard because Oracle Trace data has a lot of gaps and overlaps. And if you look at TK-Prof, for example, it might tell you that this statement took 97 seconds and that there were 40 seconds of waits. You're like, well, 97 plus 40 is a lot bigger than 110. Well, yeah, that's your problem to figure out. TK-Prof doesn't attempt to cope with that. So adding things right is the second thing we do. And then the third thing we do is we simply sort. I mean, there is no minus sort equals option on the profiler. The profiler always sorts in terms of relevance, and relevance is always response time. So it just kind of sticks out at you here. I mean, no matter which of these four tables you look at, it's CPU for fetching. Well, if I click here, I get a list of statements that contribute to CPU for fetching. And I notice, wow, there's one that's like all the time spent fetching. Let's click here, and guess what? We're at section 4.1. I'm going to go to the top one more time at the risk of making everybody seasick. The little green square with a diamond in it here, I don't know if very many people know what that means, but that logo represents the diamond in a flowchart at the top that says do this first, right? There's, no matter what your tuning process is, your optimization process, there's some decision that you make at the very beginning, and you touched on this when you asked the question. How do I know where to start? And with Method R, the place you start is always the same. Identify the things important and ask the question, how long does it take? That's always where you start. And then the second thing you do is ask, why did it take so long? And this report is the answer to why did it take so long, right? It explains why the 110 occurred. It's because this statement took 88 of it, right, or whatever. So the first step is always the same. You don't have to guess. Well, I wonder if it's an I/O problem. Well, if it were an I/O problem, then I would find it using these I/O tools. So let's go use I/O tools for a while and see if it's an I/O problem. Oh, another person in the room thinks, you know what, this smells funny. I had a problem like this one time that ended up being a latch problem. So let's run the latch tools and see if it's a latch problem. And if you go to the bookstore and pick up an Oracle tuning book, you'll see the table of contents is oriented like that. How to fix latch problems, how to fix I/O problems, how to fix CPU problems. But there's no chapter about how to know whether it's a CPU problem or a latch problem. Or, you know, there's, to me, the thing that is the magic sauce, right? The secret sauce of this is that it's that diamond. We always know what step to do first. We don't have to pick the sort order. We don't have to choose the tool. We already know what tool to use. The tool is, let's measure the experience and let's see why that experience took the time that it did. And then that indexes our attention into exactly what our problem is today. Our problem could have been any of 500 things. I saw a presentation at a conference one time where a guy was talking about the Oracle wait events, like the SQLnet message from client thing. And he was telling people, when you see SQLnet message from client, you can throw that away. That doesn't matter. That's database's idle time. Well, but if it contributes to my response time, if SQLnet message from client, this one, had happened to be the top #1 consumer of my time, then my diagnostic work today is a little different than if it's CPU for fetching, right? If it's file open, that never happens. Oh, actually, it did happen once. And it was the 99th percentile reason that this thing took, 2 minutes. So to me, the luxury of having the right tool is that it points you, it forces you to look in the right place first, instead of, well, maybe it's this, let's check that. And that's what 7-Eleven had been laboring under for 6 months, is this checklist goes, look at all the last stuff and see if that's it. Let's look at I/O and see if that's it. Let's look at your ERD and see if that's it. Let's look at your indexing strategy and see if that's it. You know what? I don't want a full table scan a list of things that it might be. I want to index into the thing that it actually is.
Yeah, and to that point, right? So one of the things that I've liked and seen the aha moment is because this is translated in response, right? Seconds, as opposed to trying to explain it in times of system resources, right? Like your CPU's high, or it's using more memory than you would expect it to use, or you seem to be having I/O latency. It's nice to be able to hand this to a development team and say, hey, this thing that you're doing, it's taking long. Have you seen any traction in the DBA teams, the system administration teams being able to use this and provide it as a communication to look at, as I think a term that you use is look at performance as a feature?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question. One of the things that I've seen and that people have actually written us about, they've written us letters, you know, explaining this tool changed the culture of our relationships inside of our organization, because before the message of look at the problem, think of user experiences and look at them. A lot of well, I'll bring it down to people. A lot of DBAs are very uncomfortable going to visit a user, right? Because I'm a specialist in rollback segments and CPU utilization, but I'm going to go to a user who's a specialist in purchase orders and receivables, and I don't know anything about their world. I don't know a debit from a credit, right, as a DBA. I'm nervous as hell walking into a room with that person because I don't want to look like an idiot. If they start talking about debits and credits and I'm like, my eyes roll back in my head, I don't want to seem unhelpful or deficient, right? So it's kind of hard that first time to go into a place where I don't know your app very well, but I'm responsible for serving that application to you. But I don't want to look incompetent by not understanding. But a lot of times that I've been the most afraid going into that user's room and standing over her shoulder looking at what she's doing, I'll see things that she doesn't see. Like one time I went to a customer site that the performance problem was the lady had to hit page down 26 times to get to the row in the vendor table that she wanted to get to before she knew what the name of the vendor was. And she didn't know, for example, that you could just type X and hit return in the vendor search field, and it would only find the names that begin with X. Yeah. So she was executing full table scans that DBAs a mile away were thinking, God, do we need a faster network? Do we need to make the multi-block read count bigger so that full table scans can go faster? And she was doing operations she didn't even want to do. So looking at it can change the whole culture of the organization because it puts DBAs and users together. It puts users and developers tend to be a little closer together because the developers are implementing the user's wishes, right? Mm-hmm. But DBAs and developers often have rocky relationships, right? The DBAs think the developers are writing crappy code that they have to then fix later. Developers think that DBAs are these staid, never want to use new tools type people, and they sort of butt heads. But when you show them one of these profile documents that says, well, here's where your hours and minutes and seconds are going. Users and developers and DBAs can all three come to the table. And even if a user looks at this and goes, I don't know what this CPU fetch, blah, 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 whatever that is means, but I guarantee I know that it's the most important thing we need to be looking at today. So if some guy's in there trying to sell them a new disk drive, the users can tell you, pound sand, we don't need you today, not for this. Yeah. Right? Everybody can see that. Now, you mentioned performance as a feature, and I don't know if you want me to go track that one down, but I've for a few years kind of ended. There's chapter 1 in the Mastering Oracle Trace Data book is about, it's called Thinking Clearly About Performance, and one of the things that it mentions is that performance is a feature. And of course, when people hear that, I expect that one of the things they think is, yeah, I expect not only does it debit and credit and some things correctly, but I expect it to be fast. That's the feature I expect. Well, if you think from the perspective now that a DBA who's responsible for providing fast experiences is really the user of the product too. That person needs to have features that better enable them to provide fast applications to their users. And the kinds of questions that that person running the system needs to be able to ask and answer are things like, how many orders did we book yesterday? How long, maybe we booked 3,217 orders. Of those 3,217 orders, did any of them take longer than 5 seconds? Because we're not ever supposed to, take more than 5 seconds to book an order. The ones that took longer than 5 seconds, were they all in Atlanta, or were they spread across Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Singapore? Is it always Nancy's book orders that ran slowly, or did some of Bruce's book orders run slowly too? And there are all these questions about performance that you really can't provide good performance unless you can answer them. And a lot of applications, though, don't really participate in giving you the information that you need to help ensure that they're running efficiently and fast, which, by the way, are two different things. We can talk about that in another webinar. But that's what I mean by performance is a feature. It's because if I were going to run the app that I'm writing, if I were going to support the app that I'm writing today, I would put a lot of extra features in there that make my future Cary life easier to enable me to do things like, when it's slow, I want to be able to hit a button that says, well, trace the next time it runs, because I want to catch it in the act of being slow. And I want to see this data without having to go off and do some DBA acrobatics that take 4 hours, right? I want to just be able to flip a switch and see, oh, okay, that's why it took so long. I want the app maybe to take care of itself. If it starts sensing itself that it's taking longer than normal, then it automatically traces itself the next few executions, right? Those are all things that software developers can very easily build into a product. They're things that we build into products when we help people build products themselves. And that's what I mean by performance as a feature.
To segue a little bit into one of the questions that Nancy's asked, right, because this idea of performance as a feature, right now we're talking about it kind of the one application per time. Her question really goes to, how do you deal with when multiple applications are hitting the same underlying systems? How do you figure out what is impacting what, and how do you isolate that experience to be able to give good advice, to be able to see what's going on?
Well, there are a couple of facets to answering that question. One is just the work involved in trying to isolate the trace data for the thing that you care about. And if you've got, there are confounding architectural choices that you can make. Connection pooling is a great idea. You need connection pooling for high performance, highly scalable apps with tens of thousands of users. You just do. But connection pooling means that a user's database transactions may occur in different processes. It may not, your transaction's not just using an Oracle process, it might use multiple Oracle processes. And furthermore, multiple users are sharing the same process. So it's kind of a many-to-many relationship between the trace data that I'm looking for and the processes that are creating the trace data. So when it's not a one-to-one mapping, it just means that there are more steps. And I think it's chapter 17 or 18 in the book, we talk about connection pooling and show the pictures of what's going on and why it's difficult and why you have to pull pieces of data from here and there and sort of concatenate them together. So there's just a plain and simple technical phenomenon of it being a little more complicated because of the many-to-many relationship. I had a second thing that was very important, and that first thing kind of swallowed it up. Yeah, it's not coming to me. It evaporated, but boy, was it good.
We'll save it for the next one, man.
Sounds good. But it's yeah. Let me look at her question again. So multiple applications dealing with the same database, and all apps. I do remember the second thing now. So the other phenomenon that you can worry about, or that people that think about trace data do worry about, is, all right, so I'm looking at the thing that takes 2 minutes. And imagine, for the sake of argument, that the reason it's slow is because some other process is making the resource that this thing needs really busy. And so this thing's having to wait for that resource. And a lot of times people think, I'm not going to bother collecting trace data, because if that's the type of problem I have, and I think it is because of reasons, whatever, the trace data is not going to show me anything helpful. And that's actually false. The trace data, if your 2-minute thing is taking 2 minutes because it's waiting for a resource held by something else, trace data is going to show you. The response time can't hide, right? If your thing took 2 minutes and your trace data accounts for that 2 minutes and that it counts exactly for your 2 minutes, then if your program was waiting on something else, you'll see it in the trace data. Now, what you won't see is perhaps who's holding the resource that you're trying to use, but you'll know exactly what resource it was. You'll know exactly when you were attempting to obtain that resource and couldn't. And if you know that, this is where the beauty of ASH comes in, right? If you've got the active session history feature because you've got Oracle Enterprise Edition and you've bought the appropriate packs to enable it, now you can go in with a query that says, I know exactly the resource that was the problem, and I know exactly which second, and actually I know which microsecond it was when it was a problem. Well, it's not that tough of an ASH query to go find out, well, who was holding that resource then? So I'm not trying to advocate that you get rid of all your other tools, because they sort of match harmoniously with the data we're looking at here. It's just that I want to see exactly what your thing did. So I want to assemble the pieces from the connection pool. And parallel execution is another complicating factor. Sometimes we'll see a single user experience is responsible for igniting 17 different Oracle sessions, right? And it's a little bit of extra work to figure out, all right, which ones of these sessions do I really need to be focused on in order to solve this person's problem? And it's just a matter of knowing what's there, having good tools, and then having enough practice to be able to do it quickly enough to make people happy with how long the project takes to make it faster.
And that is one of the really cool things about this tool, right? I mean, it's associated with the books and the method that you've created. It's really well documented. It's tried and true. And then the tool, what it does is it really highlights what someone needs to be focused on, and it almost does it instantaneously, right? It's almost like magic when you get that first trace file and somebody opens it up and goes, aha, this is where I need to spend my time. And
right.
I always really enjoy that moment of the engagement, right, when we're working with our customers around this.
It's just like unwrapping Christmas packages. You've wondered what's in there for so long that you're just burning up, eager to see what's in there. And finally, when you get to see, oh my God, that's what this thing's been doing all this time. It's every time. It's just fun. It's just.
So we just got another question in from Rakesh, and Rakesh, I'd love to answer it, but we literally have just a couple of more minutes left for today's session. So I'll make sure that we get a response to you if we're not able to address it just right now. So Cary, as we're kind of wrapping up the webinar, could you talk a little bit about what was appealing to you when we first started talking about the Centrum Method R partnership, and why do you think it's bringing such value to the table for the customers for both Centra and Method R?
Yeah, we met for lunch in probably, I want to guess it was July 2016. I know my start date with you guys was Halloween 2016, and in that very fast thinking about going from lunch with somebody you haven't talked to about working together to actually being an employee in just a couple of months is pretty amazing. And I from my perspective, we were, I'll do my fingers like this. We were this, and we had a hole that we needed filled in. We needed somebody that could fill that gap that we had. My Method R team has been a small team of inventors and software developers who can go out in the field and do consulting. And we've been around for 2 decades doing this, 3 decades if you count the Oracle decade as well. We fix problems and we build stuff. The team that I've had since 2008 has never included sales and marketing, and it's really never included a dedicated consulting force. And to me, Method R, in order to work, it's kind of like, I could go buy an old, World War II airplane, but I couldn't run it because I don't have the right kind of fuel. I don't have the right mechanic. I don't have the right guy that straps you into the cockpit. I don't have all the stuff around the thing that makes the thing go. And to me, Method R only goes if we've got 3 ingredients. We need to have the product. We need to have the capability to train people on how to use the product, but we also need a consulting delivery force that can take the product to people and use it, because a lot of people want you to do it for them. And I'll say kind of the fourth leg of this tool is the team that it takes to connect those nice things to have. It's nice to have consulting and training and software, but if you don't have the salespeople and the marketing people that will connect people that need that with the people that have it, right? I'm convinced that there's tons of people out there that need us that don't even know that we exist. And so that's a serious hole from a business perspective, that we couldn't sustain ourselves without help from somebody like Centrum. And the thing that was most interesting to me was how interested you guys were in adopting what we had and making it one of your core differentiators.
Yeah, and so from our side, right, I think what we found exciting is just the fact that we're able to bring this approach to our customers. It's really science-based. Best practices are good, and as an organization, we believe in building out robust architecture solutions for our customers that we can really back, support, and help them really begin to modernize what they're doing. And the method, our toolkit, allows us to really understand, give us X-ray vision into what's going on into their environments today, and help give really good advice for what's going to happen if they change their platform, if they're going to do something like move to cloud. And the cloud is a topic we had for today's webinar that we're not even going to get to just because of where we're at. So we'll have to save that for another day. But I think when you start talking about looking at response time and translating that to how it does apply to resource utilization in a cloud world where we care so much more about the cost of a CPU hour, right? The cost of provisioned memory and storage. This even becomes more important as you kind of fine-tune your workloads and negotiate with that with the experience of the customer that you're looking to have. Unfortunately, today, we're out of time, so it's going to be another conversation. But any closing thoughts, Cary, just as we kind of wrap up today?
I think I've said my piece. If the folks who are listening kind of have a better idea of it's not magic we're talking about. It's just a matter of that right denominator. It's look at it. What's wrong with the system? Well, let's go look at it. And how do we measure it the way that maps to the user's experience? That's key. Once you get in your mind that you need that, there are different ways to do it. But what we have here is kind of an ecosystem, as you mentioned. We've got training, we've got books, we've got products, we've got blog posts, we've got people. It works, and so I hope that is a message that people are willing to accept.
Well, we're going to wrap up here today. So first of all, thank you all for allowing us to be in your life for an hour today. Thank you for attending. I hope that you found significant value in what is presented. We're interested in the conversation starting from here and not ending here. So we look forward to dialogue with you, discussing some of your questions that you have, talking about how this might fit into some of the projects you have, or even if you just kind of want to look at what could this tool, look at possibly getting a trial of the tool, looking at where you can download the tool. All that information we'll begin to provide you in the next couple of days. Thank you, Cary Millsap, for being my guest today and allowing me to ask questions and get to understand a little bit more about the tool today. And also thank you to our producers, Haley Holmes and James Gill, for setting up the webinar, making sure that the production was seamless outside of what Cary and I did. And thank you all. So just real quickly, we'll be following up with everyone at the end of this. Since we have recorded this session, we will be making this session available for those who have attended. And we look forward to further conversations. Thank you all. Have a good day.